Picking up where the last video left off, let's talk about where Singer says the problem is. He says the problem is not a problem of production. Of all the farmers in the world, all the grains that are produced, there's enough for everybody to eat. In his view, it's a problem of distribution. In countries including America and like America, 95% of the grain is used to feed animals and it's not to eat. So if a good percentage of that grain, or most of it, were taken away from that purpose, then the people in the developing countries would be able to eat. I should note at this point that the issue that Singer is most famous for is animal rights. And so he thinks there are a number of reasons why it's wrong to eat animals. One of them is because they're suffering as a result of that. And as he's a utilitarian, the utilitarian just cares about suffering, not whether it's human, animal, or Martian. As long as there's a being that suffers or can experience pleasure, then there is some moral issue potentially involved. So his solution is that wealth should be transferred from rich countries to poor countries. And as we're going to stress several times in this talk, the burden is firmly on your shoulders, on the shoulders of everybody who is experiencing what we call absolute affluence. And that's in our next slide. So absolute affluence is not wealth by your personal standards. You might say, I'm not rich. My neighbor is worth $1 million. I know of people on TV or personally that are worth $100 million or $1 billion. So we're not talking about whether you're wealthy in comparison to Jeff Bezos. We're talking about wealth in relation to having your basic needs met and being able to have a good life. So if your necessities are covered and you have money to spend on luxuries, then you are in absolute affluence. And that is going to include people throughout the United States, even we could say many poor people. So luxuries are defined as what one does not need to live, but it goes this is not as well stated as it should be. Whatever goes beyond what one needs to live, be healthy, and have a good, decent life, those are luxuries. So we don't have to be talking about a Rolex watch. If you could think of some of the items that you cherish and ask, would a less expensive brand or not buying this item at all be something that you could live with in relation to saving someone's life? And he's going to say yes. So here are just some examples. A top of the line smartphone. Do you need that? And Singer's answer is no. Do you need the stylish high-end clothes? No, you need clothes that keep you warm and that are comfortable. Do you need a house with a lot of extra space? Do you need a mansion or a McMansion? If you are, do you really need that many rooms in a house? And the answer is no. So you don't need a house with a guest room or several guest rooms. You might say you need a car. That might be the case for a number of reasons. But do you need a slick car? Do you need an expensive car? And the answer is no, and same for an advanced stereo. So Singer is going to conclude that any individual in absolute affluence has a duty to give a portion of their wealth to people in absolute poverty, and each of you can do something to save lives. So we're going to get into more details as we go along, but that's the main point to keep in mind, and we're going to stress that. So, as we mentioned, utilitarianism does not hold, or consequentialism does not hold, that there is a moral difference between killing and letting die. Since only consequences count, all that matters really is whether a person dies. So morally, letting someone die is equivalent to murdering them. Now, there are differences between letting someone die and murdering them, but they are not moral differences. And these are what he calls extrinsic difference, meaning they're external to the nature of what's involved in an act being moral. So a lot of these extrinsic differences make us think that there is a big difference between them morally, but as a utilitarian, he's going to say, no, there is no moral difference between them. But there are differences, and we're going to talk about what these differences are. And as I go through these, note how talking about these differences makes us think that there is a difference morally between killing someone, deliberately killing someone, and letting them die. So deliberately killing someone involves you going out of your way to do it. So we've all seen movies that involve murders. We've seen news shows where there's a murder mystery involved, and when someone goes to kill someone, they have to think about it in most cases. But letting someone die, according to Singer, you're letting people die all the time. How are you letting people die? Because you're not giving that $10 or $15 a month to save a kid who is near starvation. So, and this is something that everybody's doing. Everybody who's going out for a really nice dinner, instead of eating something enjoyable but more modest in terms of the money used for it, is letting people die. So one reason why there's a difference between killing and letting die in our thinking in Western culture, and actually in all cultures, is because it's easy not to kill, right? It's easy to avoid murdering someone, but it's less easy not to allow people to die because, as I said, we have let people die. So also, there's a greater certainty of outcome with killing than with letting die. Meaning, you know that if you point a gun towards someone and you go through with it, that you will kill this person, but you don't think, oh, if I go out for a really fancy dinner, if I get really extra special sneakers for $200, you don't think of that as leading to the death of someone, but practically that is what happens. In addition, with killing, there are identifiable victims. So whenever there's a murder, we say this was the victim, and we want to find out who the perpetrator was, and we finally apprehended a suspect. So, but with letting people die, there's someone in another country, a developing country, who just dies, and you don't know who it is. You never hear about them in the news, and you actually have never heard about them throughout your whole life, and most people haven't. They just die, and then that's it. It's going to matter to someone close to them, but it doesn't matter to you. It will never make it onto a search engine news site that this person died. Now, here's another extrinsic difference. Killing a person would be my doing. So if I do it, I'm responsible. So everybody in the class, myself included, I've never killed someone. I'm not responsible for killing in terms of an active action. But we think it's not my doing if someone in another part of the world dies. I don't think I am responsible. I don't think I am to blame. But Singer thinks, well, there is a sense in which you actually are. So to stress what we've said about the basic point we're discussing here, all of these are extrinsic differences in between killing and letting die. But he says there is no intrinsic or internal difference between the two. So how do we deal with this? How does he say that these extrinsic differences are not enough to say there is no moral difference between them? Because that's his goal here, to show there is no moral difference between murdering or killing and letting a person die. So again, there's no lack of identifiable victim when it comes to letting someone die. Someone in another part of the world just dies. We don't know who they are. So he gives as an example of a case that, suppose you're selling a product, some kind of meat, and you find out it doubles cancer risk. You don't see who is going to die, but you know that if you sell enough of them, that you're raising the risk of cancer for people, and that it is likely that someone is going to die by your selling that meat. And so you would say, I would not sell that product because that would cause people to die, and raise the probability to the extent that people would die because of it. But you would never say, there's nothing wrong with me doing that because I won't be able to identify the victim. And that's the sole point he's making with that example. Just because you wouldn't be able to see who it is or know who it is doesn't make you any the less responsible for it. Let's talk about lack of certainty of the outcome. He gives the example of, well, suppose you are a crazy driver, and as residents of Staten Island, I think you might have spotted a few of them out there. And suppose the person is just a kind of wild driver. They're enjoying themselves. They're having a good time. They like taking risks. But if they do that kind of thing through a walkway where pedestrians might be walking, then even though it's only a matter of probabilities that they hurt someone, we'll still say they were responsible. So if they were reckless or just negligent, they weren't paying attention, we would say, no, they're morally responsible for that death, even though they didn't intend it. So they're not a killer like a murderer, but we would say they should be punished severely for that. So negative responsibility, this is something that was in the Nielsen article, and that says you are responsible not just for what you do, but what you allow to happen. That's what's meant by negative responsibility. So I'm responsible not only for my acts, but also for the things that I could have done to prevent something, but I didn't. And let's talk about a difference in motivation, because Singer is going to say, none of you, by enjoying a good stereo, an expensive dinner, getting really slick clothes, none of you have a motivation to kill anybody. But just because you aren't motivated to do that doesn't mean that you aren't in effect really doing that. So go back to the speeding motorists. If this person is just having fun, that's what motivated them to drive in a wild fashion. We're still not going to let them off the hook just because they didn't have a motive to kill someone, if they do indeed kill someone. So many philosophers believe we have a right to life. John Locke, Robert Nozick are two examples, and John Locke is quite important because his view of rights influenced the view of rights that is in the Declaration of Independence for the United States of America. So we have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that is almost a direct quote from John Locke's work. So these philosophers agree we have a right to life and we have individual liberty rights. They think we have a right against others who might threaten our life. So someone who kills us, someone who attempts to kill us, or someone who through negligence or recklessness takes our life, that has to be punished and we have to be compensated. But both Locke and Nozick would say we don't have a right to assistance from others when our life is in danger. In other words, if it's below zero in Manhattan and it's February, you do not have a right to assistance from other people when your life is in danger. Now, by law, the police might be obligated to pick up a homeless person who's sleeping outside and it's that cold. But the question is, do you have a right to such assistance? Now, and some of you might say, we do have such a right, but according to Singer, you're going to disagree with Locke and Nozick. So, those of you who believe you have a right to, say, you have a moral right to food stamps and to welfare, you are going to agree with Singer and disagree with Locke and Nozick, because they don't think you have a right to such assistance. So both Nozick and Locke agree that killing violates a person's right to life, and allowing one to die does not violate their right. Because you don't think I'm violating anybody's rights in a developing country by letting them starve. So here's a quick critique of Locke and Nozick given by Singer. Their views are ahistoric, meaning they have these abstract views, but they don't take into account that we are social animals. We are not isolated individuals. Individual rights are good and important, but we actually are part of a social group, and we're part of a social group called humanity, and that means we have a duty to take care of each other in a way that Locke and Nozick denied. And he brings Aquinas, St. Thomas Aquinas, one of the most important Christian philosophers ever, who's on Singer's side here. Whatever a man has in superabundance is owed of natural right to the poor for their sustenance. Let's talk about a child drowning in a pond. It's not a pleasant topic. You saw Peter Singer's way of describing the situation. Let's make it more applicable to you. So you're going to the St. John's University spring ball, and you've worked for a long time to save up $2,000 for your clothes. You're going to wear a tux. You're going to wear a lovely gown. On the way to the ball, you pass by the woods and hear a child yelling. So you run into the woods and you find out the child is drowning in the pond. And here's your situation. You have moments to save that child's life. Should you save the child's life or save your $2,000 outfit? Think about your answer. And most of you are going to say without hesitation, I'm going to save the child's life. And you would think it would be bizarre if anybody said, well, I worked hard for that $2,000 outfit. I'm not going to get it dirty. I'm not going to ruin it for a mere child's life. So here's how to apply this scenario to famine relief. By giving up your high-end cell phone, the one you've been saving for, by giving up a high-tech computer that's going to allow you to play incredible games and edit videos quite brilliantly, guess what? You're going to save people's lives. And if you really think about it, it almost seems absurd to say, no, this phone is more important than a person's life. This computer is more important than a person's life, and so on. And since you would not hesitate to do this for a child drowning in a pond, what is the difference between the child drowning in a pond and someone in a third world country who is near starvation? The only difference is they're far away from you, but Singer is going to stress that is not a moral difference. Here is where he gets into the principle that is behind his whole conclusion. And you could say this is a sub-principle of utilitarianism. Utilitarianism implies this principle. If we can prevent something bad without sacrificing anything of comparable significance, we ought to do it. Absolute poverty is bad. You all agree with premise 2. Premise 3, there is some absolute poverty we can prevent without sacrificing anything of comparable moral significance. Conclusion, we ought to prevent some absolute poverty. So here it is, here's the argument for you as an individual having a duty to give to famine relief, and here's what I want you to do. I want you to look at the whole argument and find where is the flaw. So if you agree with premise 1, premise 2, premise 3, and those 3 premises imply the conclusion, then there you are. You agree with Singer. If you find there's a problem with the argument, identify which premise is problematic, and then, okay, maybe you don't have such a duty. Just to be clear here, what we mean by sacrificing anything of comparable significance, we mean that if you give so much money that you are not getting enough nutrition, that you are out on the street, that you don't have clothes to go out in winter in, then then you're not following the principle in premise 1. So we're weighing things here. We're weighing a human life against luxuries, but Singer is the first to say if you give so much money that you are going to be someone who needs to be a subject of relief for others or an object of relief, then you've made a mistake. And also we want to say that you don't want to sacrifice anything of comparable significance. This is going to include moral significance. So if you rob a bank in order to make this happen, you're already doing something immoral. So what you should do here is go through the argument and see, okay, what is the flaw in this? Or you might just say, I can't find any flaw with it. But still try to question it and see, is this case foolproof? Is Singer right? So let's talk about what matters and what does not. One objection is, I can't make a big difference. Singer himself said there are 800 million people that are in this horrible state of absolute poverty, but that's not the issue here. The issue is, can you save someone's life? And think about those commercials. By paying $15 or $20 a month, you can save someone's life, and then that's of moral significance. Don't use the excuse, I can't save the world, I can't do everything, therefore I'm not going to do nothing. Excuse me. That was ungrammatical. Therefore, I'm going to do nothing. So that doesn't follow. We all know that you can't do everything, but can you make this moral difference? Yes, you can, and you are obligated to do so. And so the issue of distance, he thinks, is arbitrary. And just because someone is nearby you doesn't mean they're more morally important. And because, remember, we said in the United States, there are people in relative poverty, but who is near death? And then, so let's break it down and slow down for a second here. Person A is in relative poverty and doesn't have the luxuries that you have. Person B is in absolute poverty and is close to starvation, is already suffering from malnutrition. Who is your duty toward? According to Singer, it's the person B that's close to starvation. So the fact that they're from a far distance from you is morally irrelevant. Next, and we're just adding an interesting point here, the law of diminishing marginal utility says, for every unit of a product that I consider, it is of less value. So if it's summer, it's 100 degrees out, how much is a bottle of water worth? If it's really hot, I'm going to pay $5 for a bottle of water. But once I've had that bottle and my thirst is quenched, and there's no danger to my system at this point from the heat, the second bottle is going to be worth less, and the third bottle is going to be worth less still. So, translating this to our discussion, $5 means more to someone in absolute poverty than to someone in relative poverty. If someone they're eating their basics, their nutritional values are met, they're going to be happy if you give them $5 or the worth of a sandwich. If you give that worth of a sandwich to someone who's starving, you can see it's going to be worth a lot more. Remember, utilitarianism is about maximizing good, maximizing pleasure. So therefore, someone in absolute poverty, utilitarianism says, give the $5 to them. Now, some of you could just say we should take care of poverty here in America or in New York City. There's many people that need it. Okay, you should, he would agree, but think of the lines we are drawing which might be morally arbitrary, because you could draw the line at family. You could say, well, my family is closer to me. I'm going to help them and not help a poor person. And you should help your family, but utilitarianly, do they really need it? Not as much. You could draw the lines at ethnicity or race, but imagine if someone said, oh, I'm not going to give money to people that were suffering from this hurricane because I'm white and they're black, right? Or I'm white and they're Hispanic. Or someone saying, well, I'm Hispanic and those people are white. So you would think it would be at least morally suspect to say, draw the lines at that, at ethnicity or race, and the same goes for country, according to Singer. These are morally arbitrary lines, according to his thinking. How about let the government do it? So, as Singer said at the beginning of the article, many first world countries like America and European countries and Japan give 1% or even much less to famine relief. You think they should give more. And he's going to agree with you, but that doesn't relieve you of the duty to give. Remember, by spending $10 a month, you can save someone's life. And think about it if you are a person that's starving in a developing country. You're sitting there, you're close to starvation, and then in terms of your life, you don't care about whether it's coming from a government or an individual. You need to live. Now turn the situation around and you're someone who's enjoying absolute affluence. You have to think of that person who's near starvation and say, I can save someone's life. Think about how long it takes for a law to be passed or for relief to be sent to another country when you could do something right now. Additionally, if you want the government to be active in helping people in famine situations, when will they be more likely to in a democracy such as ours? When people generally think it's important, or when people themselves don't care? The answer is when people do care. Next, he says, sure, you should become politically active about the matter, but don't use government inactivity as an excuse not to give yourself. So Singer has a radical proposal here. He thinks we each have a duty to give to famine relief. He doesn't think this is a matter of charity, of some really nice, generous thing you're doing. That's an extra thought that we have. It's actually your duty. So he thinks we have to rethink our moral view of the world and then change society so that people start to take on this view. I have a duty to prevent people from dying. That's the simple takeaway sentence. I have a duty to prevent people from dying, and guess what? You can't say, I don't know about these starving people. Sure, it's not in the news, but I think you probably have heard about them before, and now you definitely know there's a really bad situation, and you have the internet so you can look it up. We can't say, I have no way to pay them. Take out your laptop and find out how long it would be to find, number one, a organization that gives to people in famine situations, and number two, how long would it take you to withdraw funds from your bank or from a credit card or that of your parents to help someone out? You know the whole thing could be done in 10 minutes. So you have much less of an excuse than someone who read this article when it came out about 50 years ago. And you can't say I'm not rich because guess what? You are in absolute affluence, according to Singer. You have luxuries, and once you learn to reduce your reliance on those, your interest on those, then you can really help people and change the world, make it a more moral world. So he thinks, all right, we should give much more than 10% of our income. It could be 30%. It could be 40%. Keep going to the point where you are living a good life, but you're not in luxury, and that's how far you should go. But we should give at least that much, and we should make it something that everyone should do in our society, and that's the way that we're going to deal with the problem of famine in the world. That's it for today.